Welcome back. Today we're going to work on the Designs by Juju Build a Ballerina Wall Hanging. I'm going to put a link in the description below to Designs by Juju. This is available on occasion as a bonus. I got this in their summer sale. I have a request to stitch this out, so I'm going to do that today. I did contact Designs by Juju to try to get a link to buy it, and I was told right now it's in the vault, but at some point it's going to pop out again. So keep an eye out on their site if you like this design. This is available in 3 sizes, 5x7, 6x10, 7x12. I'm going to work on the 5x7 today. I'm going to go through my fabric. For the body, I've picked this Kona Snow. It's very similar to Bella Porcelain if you have it. I think they may even be the same. I have some of this left over from when I stitched up the Barn Star sampler quilt. It's already starched, pressed, and ready to go. For the crown, and for the bodice, the skirt, and the slippers, I'm using these 2 colors of Fairy Frost. I have a bundle of that. It's called the Rose Quartz Fat Quarter Set. I'll be honest with you, I don't remember where I got it. Fairy Frost is by Michael Miller. This has been on my shelf a long time. For the hair color, I have this piece of Bella Solid Sunshine. I got this out of a Fat Quarter bundle that I had. This came from Fat Quarter Shop 2023, Fat Quarter Solid of the Month, and I made this quilt. I have a lot of fabric left, so I picked a color from that. For the little bit of tulle on the skirt, I don't have tulle. I have some of this lace ribbon. I have all different colors in my stash. I'm hoping this will work. We'll give it a try and see what it looks like. And then there's also some small buttons. I've got this big button jar. I just need to fish through and see if I can find some buttons. The fabric cutting is on pages 2 and 3. You've got 5x7, 6x10, 7x12. The finished sizes are right here on the front. But I want to show you before you start cutting your fabrics, there's a few choices you have to make. There's 2 skirts. This is skirt number 1. This is skirt number 2. You can see skirt number 1 is a little more decorative. That's the one I'm going to be stitching today. You have your choice of arm positions. You can have the right or the left arm out to the side and one arm up, both arms out, or both arms up. I'm going to do both arms up. Then you need to decide on leg positions. We've got the one leg to the side or legs crossed. I'm going to do the legs crossed. So if you look at these pictures, I'm doing this body layout, but this skirt. I like the skirt that's got a little more detail. Whenever I have a pattern like this, what I like to do is cover up what I'm not doing so I don't accidentally do the wrong thing. This one's a little easier because I'm going to be going down the first column, but just in case I want to cover the other sizes. Take your time and go through and figure out which one of the arm selections you're doing. I'm doing both the arms the same. I'm doing both arms bent. You'll notice we cut 1 piece of batting, but for the bent arms and backing fabric, it says to cut 2. Here's how this loads for the stitch out. So 1 piece of batting will cover the whole thing, but we're going to need fabric for the front and then also on the back of the hoop for the back side. That's why you only cut 1 batting and 2 pieces of fabric. And then double check which skirt you're cutting. Skirt 1 has more detail. I'll be stitching that today. And also pay attention to the legs. We've got the bent legs on top. I'm not doing that. I'm going to do the cross legs. So you see there's legs crossed, batting, fabric, slipper fabric, and backing fabric. Also on the list for this project is a water-soluble stabilizer. Make sure you've got one of those on hand. There's some information here about the buttons, the size that they recommend, and about fusible batting. I'm going to go ahead and use SF 101 on the back of everything. I'll be using these needles today. These have been working really well for me, especially for things that have a lot of satin stitching. In addition to the instructions, they give you another file to help with stitch out order and thread selection. I'm going to go to my thread wall and bring my fabrics with me and just pick what I think is going to look good. Here's what I pulled to start with. We're going to have detailed stitching around the body. This color is almost a perfect match for this fabric. On the face, you can see we have eyes, nose, cheeks, and lips. I went ahead and pulled black for the eyes. The color I picked for the skin will be for the nose. For the cheeks, I pulled a pale pink. And for the lips, I pulled another pink, just a little bit darker. We have stitching detail around the hair. This is a pretty good match for that. For the crown, I'm going to use the pale pink that I already pulled. And for the detail stitching on the outfit, my fabric is slightly darker, but this pink's a little too dark. Pulling another pink, there's going to be a lot of pink in this one. And that'll be for the outfit and the slippers. For batting, I've got some scraps of Hobbs 80/20 batting. I went top to bottom, making sure for things like arms and the skirt, I selected the right cut of batting. Went ahead and labeled it. I've got a little pin here to help hold the piece of paper because even though it's a sticky note, it's going to get unsticky on batting. And I labeled everything. I can set this aside and start on my fabric. I've got all my fabric cut. There's a backing fabric for the head. I did mine in the same color as the hair. I've got all my fabrics cut and fusible on the back. I marked these just like I mark the batting. Just write down what it is, and then I use the pin to hold it in place. If you don't have boards like this, you can use paper plates, and if you put a piece of scrap batting on the plate, your fabric won't slide around. And then here are the neutral fabrics. I put them on a separate board. I dove into the button jar and I managed to find 4 buttons. They're a little bit smaller than it says. I'm not sure they're going to work. Something I noticed on the picture but I don't see in the instructions is this hanging ribbon. I'm going to grab some ribbon for that. Next, we're going to hoop with our water-soluble stabilizer. Let's get everything hooped for our project. I have the Kimberbell Wash Away Stabilizer. I'd like to know what you use. This is great wash away. If you use something else, I'm curious always to learn different brands. It says to use 2 layers. I have 2 layers, and you'll see I have 2 5x7 hoops. I have 2 embroidery machines. I have a Pathfinder and a Meridian. We're going to be working on the Meridian. The screen is easier to see. I'm on the Meridian today. Let's bring up our files. I have them on USB. I have a USB just for the Designs by Juju files. Here's our Build a Ballerina. And I'm doing the 5x7 files today. And we're going to start with the head. There's a couple choices. You can see there's one with a bow and one with a crown. I'm doing the one with the crown today, so make sure you pick the correct file. It brings up my file. I'm going to hit set and embroidery. We're ready to get started. I have a neutral thread on my machine. The first thing we're going to do is stitch out the placement line. Once your placement line has stitched out, you want to go ahead and cover that with your batting. Check for stray threads. I just had a dark thread there. Whenever you're using a lighter fabric, always check for threads. I've got that there. It's not going to move. If you want, you can tape it down. I'm going to stitch the tack down line. Once you've got your tack down line, trim everything that is outside that line. Here's what it looks like when it's all trimmed. If you're doing the one with the crown, there's a couple little points right there, so be careful when you trim. I'm going to switch to the color I'm using that matches the skin. We're going to stitch a fabric placement line and place the fabric for the skin, so for the face, and then we're going to tack it down. So switch your thread and stitch out your placement line. If the placement line is stitched out, grab the fabric you're using for your head. If it's a light color fabric, check underneath it again, look for dark threads, dog hair, cat hair, fur, anything like that. Make sure you cover that placement line. You can tape that if you want, but this shouldn't go anywhere. I'm going to stitch the tack down line. I'm going to trim everything outside of that line. Got that all trimmed. The next thing we're going to stitch out is the placement line for the hair. I'm going to leave this thread on that I have because I'm using a light yellow. If you're using a darker color, you may want to switch. Personal preference. There is going to be a satin stitch that'll cover that. Up to you. It depends what you like. I'm going to go ahead, leave this thread on, and let's stitch our placement line for the hair. The placement line has stitched out. I'm going to grab the fabric I have for the hair, place that. We're going to stitch the tack down line and then trim. Go ahead and trim everything outside the line. So I need to trim this away and this away. So we're going to have 2 pieces of hair left, like the little bun at the top and then the front. I've got that trimmed. I got a little too close to the stitch line here, so I'm glad there's going to be some satin stitching. Once you have the hair trimmed, slide that back on, and we're going to stitch the placement line for the crown. I'm leaving my neutral thread on the machine. I've got my crown fabric here. It's the sparkly Fairy Frost. You could also do mylar, vinyl, something really shiny. Let's go ahead and tack that down and then trim that. I've got that trimmed. We're going to switch colors. We're going to start working on the facial detail. The first thing we're going to stitch out are the little pink cheeks. I'm going to switch to this color. I'm using a light pink. Once you've stitched out the cheeks, switch to whatever color you're using for the eyes. I'm using black, and we're going to stitch out the eye detail. Once the eyes have stitched, we're going to stitch the little nose. I'm going to try it in the same color that I picked that matches the skin fabric. The little nose is stitched out, and next up is whatever color you're using for the mouth. Once you've got all of that stitched out, we're going to work on the piece on the back. But before I do that, I'm going to change my thread so I don't forget. We're going to tack down the back fabric, and then we're going to stitch the detail around the face. So I'm going to put this color back on my machine, and then we'll put our backing fabric on. I have this off my machine. I'm going to flip it to the back, and then you want to get your fabric for the head back. I'm going to trim some of these stray threads since they're dark colored, the black and then the pink. Got those out of the way. I've got my backing fabric, which is the same color as the hair. I'm going to hold this up to the light, make sure I don't see anything through it. It looks good. You want to completely cover this. And this you're going to want to tape because you don't want this to move. So I'm going to grab some paper tape. I'm going to tape this down. So I have all my tape just very lightly pressed. Whenever you're taping on the back, you want to support your project, and then you can make this a little more secure. You don't want to push because you'll end up pushing it and moving the stabilizer. So at least support on the back. I've got that taped and ready to go. We're going to put this back on the machine. We're going to stitch the tack down, and then we'll take it off and we'll trim. The outside line has stitched. So you'll take this off your machine and trim everything outside of the line. You can take your tape off first. I like to save my tape. I'll actually hang it off this table that I'm working on because it stays sticky for quite a while, and I can usually use it a couple of times. I've got everything trimmed. We're going to put this back on our machine, and we're going to start the outer detail stitching. The first thing that's going to stitch is the satin stitching around the face. So double check your thread color, make sure you've got the color that you want on there, and we'll go ahead and stitch that detail. Once you've got that stitched out, we're going to do the hair outline. So switch to the color you're using for the hair. Once the hair is stitched, we're going to do the crown detail, so put on whatever color you've picked for that. Once the crown detail is stitched, the last thing that it wants to stitch out is a little mark down here. That's going to be where the button goes, and I looked at the picture, the bodice is going to go on top of that. I have light pink on my machine. I'm just going to stitch it out in light pink, that way I'll be able to see that. That's the last thing we need to stitch for this part of the project. We're all done with the head. I'm going to take it out of the hoop and set it aside. I'll do all the trimming for all the pieces together at the end after we've stitched everything out. Let's pull up the file for the arms. You're going to have several choices for this. We've got singles and pairs. I'm doing both arms bent. If you're doing one arm straight and one arm bent, you need to look at the hands and make sure you pick the right arm. I picked both arms bent. I'm going to go ahead and select that one. You can see it comes up together. It'll fit in one hooping. We'll hit set. We'll hit embroidery. I'm going to keep the same color thread on for this whole thing. We're going to do our batting placement and tack down, fabric placement and tack down. We'll have a backing fabric like before and the detail stitching. So I'm using the thread that I picked for the skin color. Let's go ahead and start with our batting placement line. Once you have your placement lines, go ahead and place your batting. Now we're going to stitch our tack down. Once you've got everything tacked down, trim the extra batting away. I've got everything trimmed. We're actually going to add both our front and the back fabric. So to add your back fabric, do it just like we did before with the head. Put it down and tape it. I'm going to do that first and I'll show that. Here's the back of my hoop. I use that tape again. The backing fabric is taped down. I'm going to flip it to the front, put it back on our machine, and we want to grab the front fabric for the arms. It's my front fabric. I'm going to go ahead and cover that. Slide it back on my machine, and we're going to stitch the tack down. Once your tack down is stitched, trim everything outside the stitch lines. Once you've trimmed the front, remember, flip to the back, remove your tape, and also trim the back. I have my front and my back fabric trimmed. Now is a good time to check your bobbin. We've got some heavy outline satin stitching here, so throw on a new bobbin, and let's go ahead and stitch the arm satin stitching outline. Once the satin outline has stitched, the last step is going to be those two little marks for the buttons. The arms are done. I'm going to set this aside. We're going to start on the legs. I'm going to bring up the file for the legs. If you're going start to finish through the instructions, they do some other parts first, but this is so similar to the arms, I think it's easy to do this one next. So let's bring up the leg file, and again, make sure that you pick the correct leg configuration that you've selected. I'm doing the cross legs. We're ready to start. We're going to start with the batting placement line. Go ahead and put your batting over the placement line, stitch your tack down, and then trim everything that's outside of the placement line, just like we did with the arms. My tack down is done. I'm going to go ahead and trim my extra batting. I have my batting trimmed. I will say this is tight in here. Again, I'm doing the 5x7, so it's probably smaller. Once that's trimmed, the next thing that's going to stitch out is going to be the placement line for the leg fabric. I'm going to take this off the machine and place your leg front fabric and flip it to the back and tape it and place the backing fabric. I've got the back fabric taped into place. Make sure that's nice and secure. We're going to flip to the front, put it back on the machine, and place our front fabric. Once that's in place, we're going to stitch the tack down. You want to take this off your machine, trim away the extra. Once you have the back and front fabric for the legs trimmed, I switched to the color that I'm using for the slippers. We're going to stitch the placement line for our slippers. Grab your slipper fabric. You want to cover the placement line, and then we're going to tack that down and trim. I just tacked down and trimmed this, and I realized I forgot to cut backing fabric for my slippers. So I need to go cut another piece of backing and then back up my machine, and I'll redo the tack down. Here's my backing piece. I'll show you how to back up your machine in case you've never had to do that before. Right here, there's a needle with a minus plus. I'm going to hit that. And I'm going to hit this double arrow pointing up. It's going to go back one step. There we go. That's what I need to stitch again. So I've got that set. I'm going to place this, tape it, stitch it, and trim it. I just did this wrong because frankly I'm hungry. I'm trying to finish this before lunch. You place the leg fabric, you do the front legs. You do your batting placement, your line for your fabric, you tack down the fabric and you trim, and you just do the front. There's only slipper front fabric. I did have it cut correct. Then you'll go ahead and do the placement line for the slippers, put your slipper front fabric down, do the tack down for the slippers, and trim. So at that point, everything is on the front. Then you're going to flip it to the back, tape your back fabric, and stitch the tack down line. They show the back with no slippers. I did the front and the back of the leg like I did with the arms, assuming it would be the same and following what was coming up on my machine. So that's where the mistake was. What I ended up with, and honestly, it's going to be fine. It's going to be the back of the project. Here's what mine looks like from the front. And here's the back. Now I'm going to have satin stitching for the legs and for the slippers. So mine will have slippers on the back, which actually I think is going to look just fine. That'll look cute instead of just solid leg fabric. So you've got a choice how you want to do that. If you like the look, I'll show it to you at the end, of having the little slippers on the back, then you'll cut 2 slipper fabric and go through the steps like I did, where you'll place your front fabric for the leg and the back fabric for the leg at the same time, and then do front slipper and back slipper and trim those. And now we're going to advance to the detail stitch. Let's have a look at that. This is so you can see how it presented on my machine. We just tacked down the slipper, and now it has the tack down for the whole leg again. I've already done that. I don't need to do that, but if you're doing the plain leg on the back, you'll do that. The next thing it shows is the detail stitching for the leg. I'm holding the camera so it's a little shaky, sorry. See how there's no satin stitching on the bottom? So I want to do the satin stitching for the leg first. That's going to be my next step, and then after that I'll have the satin stitching for the slippers. And then I'll show you what mine looks like when it's done. I'm going to go back to the leg detail, and I'm going to do the leg outline stitching. I've switched to the color that I need for the legs. I'm going to stitch that satin stitch. That's all stitched out. I'm going to switch to the pink, and I'm going to stitch the outline for the slippers. The last step is stitching the little mark where we're going to attach. I'm going to go ahead and do that in pink. The legs are stitched. It looks good from the front. Let's look at the back. Okay, so here's my thoughts on this for you when you make this. If you want to put slipper fabric on the back, match your bobbin thread to your front thread. See how this is outlined in white? That's because I'm using a white bobbin thread. If I would have wound some of that pink thread, this would have had a nice pink satin stitching. That would have looked better. I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the hoop. We'll move on next to the bodice. I want to put this in while I'm thinking about it. I just came back from lunch. So we just did the legs, and I went over adding the extra fabric on the back, and you could have picked a matching bobbin thread. If you look at the rest of the project so far, not so much the arms are fine. But when you look at the head, if you want this to be visible on both sides, let's say you want to make it more like a mobile, you could cut another piece of crown, and then for the backing, you would cut for the skin and for the hair. And as you're working through, you just have to watch which stitches are coming up. But just food for thought, if anybody wants this visible on both sides, you would need a piece of crown fabric, a piece of hair fabric, and a piece of the skin color fabric. And then you would want to match your bobbin thread to whatever thread you're using for your stitches. And then your project would have a back side that it would really look like the front and the back. Let's bring up our file for the bodice. It's right here. Going to go ahead and hit set and embroidery. We're going to stitch the bodice. I've got the pink thread that I selected to use for that. I'm going to use that throughout this stitch. We're going to start with our batting placement. Go ahead and place your batting, tack it down, and then trim. Once it's trimmed, the instructions say add the front and add the back. So I would do the back first, put your fabric down and tape it, and then we'll be back on the machine and put our front fabric down, and we'll tack it down. I've got my back fabric taped, ready to go there. I'm going to put this on the machine. I'm going to put the front down, and then we're going to stitch our tack down. Once that's stitched, take this off the machine, trim your front fabric, flip to the back, take off the tape, and trim the back fabric. I've got everything trimmed. If you're wanting this project visible from the front and the back, like we just discovered when I worked on the legs, match your bobbin thread to your top thread because you've got the same fabric on the front and the back. The bobbin's probably going to run out in this one. I'm going to change it. Does anybody else do that? I just don't want to take the chance that I have to change it in the middle of a satin stitch. So I switch it, and I'll use a full bobbin, and then I end up with a bunch of half bobbins, and I have to try and use them on smaller projects. So check your bobbin before you start your satin stitch. Once your outline satin stitch is done, we're going to stitch the buttonholes. The bodice is done, and again, if you would have stitched with matching thread in your bobbin, this could be either side. This is done. We're going to set it aside, and we're stitching the skirt. That's the last thing we're going to stitch out, and then we can talk about trimming and putting everything together. Let's pull up the file for the skirt. Remember, you've got choices for this one. I'm on the 5x7 size, and I chose skirt 1. This is skirt 1. It's got a little more detail around the edge. Skirt 2 is a little simpler, so make sure you pick the one that you cut your fabric for so it'll fit. I have the same pink thread, and my skirt fabric is the same as the bodice fabric. That's why my thread's the same. Let's stitch our batting placement line. Grab your batting, cover the placement line, and then we're going to stitch the tack down. Once this is tacked down, trim it, tape your backing fabric to the back side, put your front fabric over the front, and we'll stitch the fabric tack down. This would be another opportunity if you want it to look double-sided to match your bobbin thread to your top thread. I've got my backing fabric taped on. We're going to put this on the machine, put our front fabric on, and tack it down. That's all stitched. I'm taking this off my machine. I'm going to trim the front fabric, flip it to the back, take off the tape, and trim the back fabric. It's all trimmed back and front. The next two steps are a placement line and a tack down line if you're placing some tulle or lace. I have this itty bitty little lace. It's probably going to look kind of silly, but let's try to use it so we can work through this step and see how that stitches out. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the placement line for my little lace ribbon. It's hard to see, but the placement line stitched right here. The top of the skirt has a gentle curve here, here, and here. That's where your placement line stitched. Now my ribbon, it's not really stretchy at all. Stretch ribbon would be easier. What I'm going to try to do is see if I can maybe gather it just a bit along that stitch line and create some pleats, and then I have to tape it down. So I'm going to cut off a random length piece of it. I'm going to grab my tape. I'm going to start right here. I can always trim. So this is where it's going to start. It's going to go corner to corner. So I'm going to extend beyond the corner, and we'll tape that down. So I'm going to pull a little bit up. I'm going to hold it. I hope my hands aren't too much in the way. I'm going to pull a little bit more and hold that. I'm going to grab a piece of tape, kind of try and hold that in place, make sure I'm on that stitch line or close to it. I hate picking out tape from stitch lines though, and that's what's going to happen with this, although I think the bodice will hang over it. Here's the center. I'm actually going to tape the center, and then I'm going to make my fold go the other way. Just a tiny piece of tape right there. So I have a couple little folds. Now I'm going to fold the other direction. Tuck that like that. One fold. Where's my top corner? Right there. I've got two folds. One fold, two fold, trying to match it to the other side. And let's tape that down. Okay, I've got my little bit of lace ribbon. Looks like I might need one more piece of tape there to hold that down to keep it from getting caught. As I'm getting ready to put it on my machine, I started to slide it under. This really stood up. There's no way it wasn't going to get nailed by the presser foot. So I put another piece of tape here. I'm going to keep an eye on this. Let's stitch the tack down line. You can see the tack down line right here, so I'm going to have to pull off this little bit of tape. This should come right off. I didn't tape that down really hard. Then I have to decide where I want to trim my lace. Hindsight being 20/20 what it is, I should have cut this just a little bit past. Watch. Fold it under. And then I have a clean edge. The next thing we're going to do is stitch out the satin stitching. I think what I'm going to do is fold this like that for that clean edge. I'm going to do that on both sides, and I'm going to tape it here to hold it in place. Then as it goes around and does the satin stitch, that part's going to get tacked down and I'm going to have a nice clean folded under edge. I can see, you know, this isn't tacked down here, this isn't tacked down here. I'm going to keep a close eye on this. Let's do our satin stitch. We've got two more things to stitch. We have a buttonhole here and then the little mark to where we're going to sew our button up on top. We are done. Let's go ahead and take this off the machine and have a look at this. Here's the little detail. It came out nice. It adds a little something to it. I'm going to get this out of the hoop and we're going to start trimming our blocks. I've got all my parts here. We're going to go ahead and remove the wash away stabilizer and then work on project assembly. The first thing I want to do is get rid of as much of this extra stabilizer as I can. This kind doesn't tear. So I like to start by just getting rid of a lot of the extra on the outside, and then I have to trim closer to the stitching lines. So I'm going to get rid of the bulk here. So that's what I have to start with. I'm going to go ahead and do that for all my pieces. When you look at what you have cut off, you might be able to save this and reuse it, especially if you do things in a 4x4 hoop. Now we need to cut this away, getting as close to the stitching as possible, but don't damage your stitching. You don't have to get right up next to it. You can leave a little bit because this is wash away. And in fact, if you're uncomfortable trimming any more than this, it is wash away stabilizer. You could set this in water and let it sit and then kind of let it dissolve and pull it off, but I'm going to trim some more. Here's some different scissors that we'll try and we'll see what works best. These two are Karen K. Buckley scissors. They're very, very sharp. This is my curved applique scissor, just generic. I bought it online. And these snips came from my Kimberbell scissors kit. I've had these a long time. They're starting to get a little dull and they don't cut as well as they used to. I think I'm going to go with the really sharp scissors. Let's do a little bit with each and see how it is as far as ease of use and how close we can get. So I don't want to touch my stitches. These cut really well. Okay. Very easy to use, really sharp. Let's take the bigger pair. Same thing, these are going to be really sharp. I can just cut more at once. Also very easy to use. Be careful not to cut your stitching. These are really good for straight sections. I've got some curves here. Let's try both of our curved scissors. Here's my little snips. Trying to be careful not to cut my stitching. Yeah, see, these are not quite sharp enough anymore. My husband did sharpen them a little bit, but they're getting difficult to use. I've had these a long time. So that does work, and the plus is you can get a little bit closer to your stitching with the curved scissor. And then let's try these. These are really big. I'm sure they'll work just fine, but I feel like my hand is really far away from the tip, which is going to make it hard to control for this. It's okay for applique, but I don't think this is going to be my best choice for this. It's okay. They're a little too big for me. As far as how this feels, I wish they were a little bit more compact. I think I'm going to work with these tiny little scissors. And then when I need to get into a corner, I'm going to use the snips. So let's go around this one together. Oh, these are great. Wonderful. Now I've got a small piece there. Go ahead and come on this side. So we'll cut this one together in real time, and then I'll cut the rest and I'll set that to music. So be real careful. So straight scissor on a curve is totally doable. If you've got small scissors that are really sharp, not a problem. Okay, be careful of your little special corners and things. I'm going to come in and cut that off. Don't do this if you don't have a lot of time and you're in a hurry. You'll end up cutting your stitching, and the stitching took a really long time. You don't want to do that. I'm actually doing this part on day 2. I did all the embroidery the day before I'm cutting. It was too much in one day. If you have multiple machines or you want to put more than one item, like the arms and the legs together in a big hoop, it might go a little bit faster. but there's a lot of satin stitching for this project. It just takes time. Got this last little curve. That looks pretty good. You want to go ahead and do that to all your pieces. So I'm going to cut all the rest, and then we'll remove the extra wash away. Here's how I like to remove my wash away. I get paper towels or a dish towel. This is just a cringy old dish towel. Got a little bowl of water. I like to use these. These are sponge brushes for crafts. It's got a little wash away actually on it from last time. I'm going to take a second and rinse it and then just blot it out. You can use watered up paper towel, watered up Kleenex. You can do Q-tips. I'm going to go ahead and get my brush wet. Squeeze out the extra so it's not sopping wet. I'm just going to kind of hold it and start brushing. And usually it comes away really easily, but we have 2 layers here, so you may have to let it soak a bit. There it goes. See how it just starts to disappear? And then you can feel it with your finger. If you feel sticky, then there's still a little bit left. Go ahead and go over it again. That's better. Now it feels nice and clean. Just go all the way around. Again, if you don't want to do this and you're comfortable, your fabrics aren't going to run and your thread colors aren't going to run, you can take it to the sink or a bowl and just drop the whole thing in, let it sit for like 15 to 20 seconds, give it a shake, and then kind of rub the edges, and everything will come off probably all at once, a little bit faster. You can see my fabric's getting wet anyway, so everything will get wet. You can also make it damp and pull it away with your fingers, but I'll let you know you're going to get really sticky. And then you still need to get the extra. So there's a couple ways you can get that off. I like to use the brush. Usually I've only had to do this for smaller projects. This is the biggest project I've done with the wash away like this. And having the 2 layers, it's just taking longer. So we're going to do all of the pieces like this. You need to get rid of the wash away. If you have any questions on the wash away, leave it below for me. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and set this to music, and you can watch as I work through removing the wash away stabilizer on the rest of the pieces. All my pieces are done. I'm going to go ahead and wet this, give it a good scrub, squeeze it out. I'm just going to grab a Kleenex. And then I keep this in a little pencil holder in my craft room so it'll be ready for next time. Get my water out of the way, get my scissors out of the way. Now everything is a little damp. I like to wait for everything to dry before I do the next step, because we're going to be sewing on some buttons and we're going to be going through the fabric here for buttonholes. I don't want to do that on wet fabric. I live in Arizona. It's September. It's still 100 degrees out during the day. I'm going to take this outside. I'm going to put down a fresh towel, lay it in the sun for probably 5 minutes, and it'll be dry. Let's go ahead and finish our project. We're going to work on the ribbon holes at the top of the hair. We've got 2 holes here. It says to use a cutting tool to open. If you've got one of those, I think it's called an awl. Sometimes it comes with sewing machines and you put it down and then you whack it and it'll punch a hole. I don't have one handy. I've got this seam ripper. I actually got this from Power Tools with Thread from their shop. There's a clip on it to keep it from rolling. I haven't even used the seam ripper part. It has a stiletto on the other end. That's the only part I've used, so this should be really sharp. I'm going to leave it down on my cutting board. I'm just going to poke it. And then we'll work on putting a hole in it. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not poking the stitches. That looks good. I just want to get the hole started, and then I'm going to go in and trim with my scissors. Okay. I've got a nice little opening. I'm going to set that aside. And I'm going to use my scissors. I'm going to put them through that opening. See? And then I'm going to carefully trim. Be very careful not to cut your stitches. This would be easier with a poking tool. If you've got one, grab it. These won't even cut because these are kind of thin blades. I need to get the bigger scissors with the bigger blades. These blades are a little more heavy duty. These are almost flexible because they're so small. Let's try this one. Let's be real careful. Don't cut your finger on the back too. There, I just cut a small little snip. I'm going to cut a little bit at a time. Make sure I'm going through to the back. You can actually like cut the top layer and then cut the back layer. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to be putting a ribbon through this, so the goal here is just to make space to put the ribbon through. And here are my thoughts on this. If I made another one, like if you're making these for kids or something, I wouldn't do this. I would hot glue the ribbon to the back and then you wouldn't have these little marks and you won't have the ribbon running through the hair. Personal preference, however you want to do that. Now I've got a big enough hole. It's a pretty good size hole. It is not the neatest hole, but we're going to put a ribbon through it. I'm going to clean this one up and then we'll do the next one. I'll go ahead and put that to music. It's kind of boring to watch. I have some white ribbon, and what I'm going to do is put through each end so that it's pulling through from the front, and obviously I'll be trimming this, but I want to put the ribbon in this way, front to back and front to back, so it pulls the fuzzy fabric toward the back. So we'll just kind of wad it up, grab it. Okay, both the ends are through. There's a little mark kind of here and here, so I'm going to pull one end through so this part won't need to be ironed. That's what I'm aiming for. No ironing. That looks good. If you don't want to loop, let's say you want to tie it in a bow, just leave this longer. You can tie it in a bow. You can do all sorts of things with that, but it doesn't look too bad. That looks fine. I think this is good. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I want to make sure it'll fit over a doorknob. If it fits over my fist, it'll fit over a doorknob. That looks good. Then we're going to tie the back. We're going to set this aside. We're going to work with our buttonholes. We've got buttonholes on the bodice and buttonholes on the skirt. Here's my thoughts on the buttonholes. What I would do, again, if I would make another one, I wouldn't do any of the buttonholes. I would go ahead and stitch out the marker, and then I would use Velcro. They make sticky back Velcro. You can buy little dots, you can buy strips, and you just peel it off, stick it on, and then you can put the other part here and stick it on like Velcro. So if you're giving this to a kid and it's got Velcro, then they can just peel pieces on and off. You can make a bunch of different colors for the outfits and they can play with it easier. You could also do snaps. Now if you sew on a snap, a little bit will be visible on the front, but like for here, if you have the tool, you won't see it. And if you're careful, when you go to stitch a snap on the back, whoops, on the back of the bodice, this is 2 layers. You can probably get a needle in under there. Let's go ahead and open our buttonholes. In the instructions, it shows this little cutting tool. I don't have one. Seam ripper. Now, before we do this, I'm going to go grab my buttons. Look at the button and look at the buttonhole. I went to my button jar. I grabbed a few buttons so we can see what different sizes will look like. This little pink one, actually that's a 1/4 inch button. This is a 1/2 inch button. So if you have a 1/2 inch button, that's about what it'll look like. You can still see a little bit of the buttonhole. This is about 3/4 of an inch. And there I feel like, and not just because it's brown, it's a bit larger, it starts to intrude on it. 1/2 inch is probably good. Here's what I came up with for 1/2 inch buttons. They're pink with gray. This is pink and silver. Let's go ahead and work on our buttonholes. I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to use the seam ripper. The thing I'm going to do I'm going to grab a pin. I'm going to put a pin near the end so I can't run my seam ripper through the end of the buttonhole. See that? Because I'm going to run the seam ripper this direction, it'll hit that pin and it can't go any further. Go ahead and poke that in. Be careful not to catch your stitches. I'm going to make sure it's coming through the back. Yep, I can see it. And don't seam rip your fingers either. I'm a little too close to the stitches on the left. Just going to move it more toward the center. I'm going to gently push that through. And slowly slide this through. Open up that buttonhole. I'm still keeping an eye on where I am in relation to the end, but I know I won't go too far because I'll hit that pin. I think I just hit that pin. If I got a little bit more, I can go. Let's check with our button. Yep, all good. I'm going to do the same procedure for these. I always do this with buttonholes. I love having this pin stop at the end. That way you know you're not going to run over the edge of your buttonhole. All of my buttonholes are done. Our ribbon is done. Now we need to sew on some buttons. Grab all your pieces and look for those little X's. You've got one here on the arm, one there. I've got one that's very difficult to see right here on the skirt, and then one on the legs. To sew on my buttons, I'm going to use the same pink that I used to outline everything. It's this color. I've got my thread here. I'm going to show you something that I like to do. This is how I do my start and cross stitch. It's called a loop start. So instead of one piece of thread with a knot at the end, fold your thread in half, bring up your two ends so they match, and we're going to put both of those ends through our needle, and then we have a loop down here. Let me grab a needle. Just grab one of my needles that I use for hand stitching. I don't enjoy hand stitching. I have to use a needle threader or it's just not going to get threaded. You've got your two ends. Those are both going to go through the needle. So let's put those through my needle threader. And this is polyester thread. It's really slippery. You kind of have to hold on to everything. There we go. You can see where the X is. I'm going to try to center my buttonholes. It's just a 2 buttonhole button. That'll be easy. I can see the thread. I'm going to center it. The thread almost disappears when I do that. Hold the button right there. I'm going to come up from behind. Oh, bullseye on the first try. How about that? Don't pull it all the way through. We've got that loop on the end. I'm going to hold it where I want it. Put that down through there. Pull my needle through. Here's your loop. Put your needle through your loop of thread. And it's secure. You didn't have to knot that. I'll show that again in case it didn't show up very well. And you're also pulling through 2 pieces of thread at a time, which will make this extra secure. I'm going to do 3 for each buttonhole. I just knot. I'm going to take the needle off the loop, pull the ends through, hold it down close to the base, and I'm going to do that probably 3 times. That button is on. In case you've never done that loop start before, I'll show it one more time. So you cut a piece of thread this is clearly longer than I'm going to need. That's fine. Got both my ends. Let's use our needle threader. Both ends through the needle threader. Leave a long enough tail because it's polyester and it's slippery. We're going to go through the back. You can also do this. This has a nice X. You can just poke your needle through. That's actually right where I want it. And then put your button on it. then you don't have to worry about it. Right there. Pull this through, but not all the way through. Going down. So you've got your needle coming through and your loop of thread on the back. There's my loop. Needle through the loop. And then you don't have to tie that. And I'll go through 2 more times and tie it off. So you have buttons here and here, and then again each of the shoulders and the skirt. I'm going to go ahead and do those off camera. I've got all the buttons sewn on. A couple thoughts about this before we assemble it. If you like the buttons, of course go with the buttons, but I did also talk about snaps and Velcro. If you have a button like this, it sort of has an inset. You can buy flat back rhinestones, little sparkly jewels at the craft store. You could put a little jewel inside of that, or if you have a flat button, you can do the same thing. You could hot glue it and make these real sparkly. With the crown, the same thing. Wouldn't this look cute if you had some tiny sparkles and you put one on each of the crown points? If you really want to get super sparkly, you could go all the way around and cover the whole satin stitching with sequins or with some sparkles. Let's go ahead and assemble our ballerina. Anyone else feel like a mad scientist doing this? So we have to look for buttonholes and buttons and just slide everything through. From the back, put the head on first and then the arms. So the arms are covering this part. I think it looks better. Here's my little slippers. Let's turn it over to the front. The big reveal. This is the 5x7 size. The feet look good. The legs attach nicely to the skirt. It does move because there's buttons. My little bit of lace that I added here, it's definitely too short. Do you see how you can't really see it here? I would go for something a little bit longer. Also, if you do a longer piece of tulle, it'll cover that button. It still looks cute though. Moving up, you can see how the bodice piece kind of bends when I added the buttons. That's fine, it doesn't bother me. I think if I made my buttonholes a little bit bigger, maybe it wouldn't have, or if I did that button wrap, you can sit here and fuss with it and pull it and try and get it straight. But this is why I like this configuration on the back. So put the head on first and then the arms, because if you have the arms on first, you see like a little bit of shoulder popping through and it just looks weird. It looks good. It's a nice little decoration. You can see you can play with it and move the arms around. You can make different outfits. If you want to get really creative, you could even put a little magnet on the crown and then make different crowns that you can attach and take off. You could have like a little metal crown or a rhinestone crown. You could add rhinestones to it. You could put little bows in the hair if you want to add some bows here. You could even do like little yarn ponytails if you want to add ponytails. There's a lot you can do with this. Let's get a look at her this way. She's ready to hang up top to bottom. Thank you so much for making the Designs by Juju Build a Ballerina with me. And I did make this by request, so if you have a project request, please leave it in the comments box below. Please leave me some feedback. Let me know if the tutorial was easy to follow, if you like the way I do the stitch outs. Thank you so much for joining me. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. I'll see you next time.